Okay, today, two. All right. So we're going to talk about the levers of health. So far, we're at five. This may change over time, but this is basically what we've come to on. When you think of leverage, it has to do with applying an input somewhere and getting an output somewhere else, right? And so that's why we use the term levers of health, because the question is, what are your inputs and how do those manifest in better health on the back end? So
So
we
these
have,
are the things that when you put a focus on working on, you're going to get the best bang for your buck, the most leverage in your health and making a difference in your health and your quality of life. So, what are these five things?
correct. We got nutrition, movement, sleep. I would say those are probably the big three. And then we have the mind, which, and we have community and connection. I paused on the mind because that's always a weird one because you can't really separate the mind and the body, but we're talking about it more in terms of what are the psychological tools you can use
And I
that,
think it's important to focus the mind separately from the body because it's
yeah,
a different type of training, I would say, you would do for
yeah,
both.
different inputs,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Even though they're affected by one another,
Yeah.
the way you approach, um, you can use different techniques through the body versus through the mind to create change in the body. Um, okay, perfect. So nutrition. Um, the sorry, I gotta get myself back on the camera here. Um, how does nutrition actually create leverage for better health? Um, Probably the most obvious one is majority of your body composition change is going to come through nutrition. That's the easy low hanging fruit. That's also the one that I think attracts most people into getting into health. Um, is the aesthetic quality and that weight gain is, unfortunately, it's a lot of people think that, sorry, not weight gain, body composition. A lot of people think that that actually is all of health, and they think if I hit this one number on the scale, then I'm all good, which is not accurate. That's only one component of health, but it's also the most visible and generally the one that makes people the most self-conscious. And so it does end up being the focus of what most people talk about when they talk about getting into health. Most people's first step is getting weight management under control. So that's going to be the big driver from nutrition. And then also the more abstract concept of we are what we eat, right? So the quality of the food that we're putting in our body is going to determine whether or not our body has the right raw materials to execute the functions that it's supposed to do, right? Um, Making our organs function well, breathing, blood flow, all of these things, energy levels, cognition, memory, all of these at the cellular level and at the chemical level, there are different components that we need, whether that's magnesium, right? Or energy in the form of coming from carbohydrates, fat, or protein. Um, we need to take in a lot of this externally, not actually carbohydrates, but um, we need to get things into the body from outside. And so the quality of what you're eating and the nutrient density is going to be very important. Um,
And this plays into your body composition, right? What you eat makes up your tissue in your body.
right,
So, how much muscle you have, how much fat you have, the quality of your tissue, right? What you eat, the quality of your food is going to dictate the quality of your body tissue.
right. And it's also going to play into how your body metabolizes different foods, which not too much detail in this one, but kind of the concept of being fat adapted, to where if you have too many carbohydrates in your body constantly has an influx of energy and it never has to learn to burn fat as fuel. And so as you reduce the carbohydrates, now you're forcing your body in a position where it has to learn to use other substrates as fuel, um, which will end up being fat, ideally.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think we should really do a deeper dive on nutrition and what we kind of think as an optimal diet to become fat adapted
right.
and to be able to burn fuel more efficiently. So we'll definitely do another episode on nutrition.
Yeah, I would like to do a deep dive onto all of these topics eventually. Um, Anything else on nutrition?
No, I think those are the two main whys, right? Like body composition is important and food quality. So
Okay.
yeah.
Um, okay. Movement. The first distinction I want to make on movement is the difference between exercise and non-exercise movement. So I think this is something that gets muddled in the modern health world. And this is an area where it's a lot more simple than people make it. We are not designed to be sedentary and sit around all day. So we should have a good chunk of our day moving. Now, that can include walking, hiking, right? Um,
And ideally, it won't be just one single part of your day in an exercise, a bout of exercise, right? It's supposed to be dispersed throughout your day, and we're supposed to be getting up and down out of our seats and moving around because that's
right.
how we would have evolved, right? Tons of movement.
That was the point I was going to make. Is the easy ones to think of are walking and hiking and playing with the dog and all that stuff. But there's also just not sitting is a driver. And so, like, for example, if I'm on a phone call, not that I do this consciously, I can't help it. I like pace. Like,
Yeah.
you've seen me pace up and down the hills. Actually, what did we have? We were redoing the kitchen and we had the ladder here. And I was like high stepping like I was at the NFL
You just
combine
kept going
back and
over across the ladder back and forth, and I couldn't help
yeah.
myself from
I
laughing.
I didn't know I was doing it until you laughed at me.
Yeah.
But that's something that's been shown as like people who fidget and that they have better weight loss outcomes, and or usually actually they just don't tend to put weight on.
Hmm.
um Whether or not you should be fidgeting and all that in terms of the baseline anxiety and that type of stuff, that's kind of a different conversation. But this idea that motion does not always have to fit into these clear boxes, right? Sometimes the difference, if you're someone, let's say, that works from home and just getting up every half hour to just like go get a glass of water, walk to the bathroom, just walk outside, look at the sun, like all of these things are, they contribute to non-exercise movement. Um, then you have exercise movement, which the way that we frame this is more of you're approaching movement with a specific goal in mind, um, or a specific intention, right? It doesn't always have to be a goal in the sense of like hitting a PR or something like that, but primarily it should be, it should revolve around improving the quality of movement and decreasing the chance of injury as you move forward and making yourself strong. And so, well, that's the lever. That's movement. Movement. The main lever that I think it's left behind nowadays is the idea of being strong, right? Everybody's talking about scientific studies on gaining muscle mass and athletic performance and these different variables. But at the end of the day, you want to bring it back to, I'm a human and I need to move through the world and I need to be physically competent to do what I want to do, whether that means moving furniture or playing with grandchildren or just, I mean, the confidence to like get up on a step ladder and grab something out of the cupboard, you
Yeah,
know?
just being dynamic in your day to day, like not having to worry, oh, can I do this movement? Like not being hesitant, right? Like stepping down from stairs or like, yeah, just being dynamic in your everyday movement and training, keeping an eye on that should be your goal of training is like, I'm training for every day. You can have specific goals or I'm trying to get stronger, I'm trying to increase muscle mass, but really ideally your long-term goal with training is to be able to do the training for as long as possible in your life, right?
Right. And that's why it's a lever of health. Remember, we're always bringing it back to like this episode, and most of what we talk about is about general health. What's going to be best to improve the quality of your life overall in a sustainable manner. And you can take things like athletic performance or personal goals in a separate category because a lot of times those actually come into conflict with what would be best for your health. So if you take someone like a high level athlete, especially someone like MMA fighters, where they're preparing, they're trying to peak for this one event, and they have to go through this grueling training to prepare themselves, or like a marathon triathlon runners, where they're taking themselves to extremes in terms of output over time. Um, you can optimize for that, but understand it's going to come at the cost of your overall health. And there's always going to be a trade off there. So the main focus is for us, and particularly in this episode, is how do we is not how, but is the fact that we're using these things to leverage our health, our personal health, prioritizing our ability to maintain health over the long term, not optimizing for a short term goal or um, achievement that we're looking to go after, which is a goal. Okay.
Yeah, I think we
Anything
covered
else about movement?
just focusing on movement that is not going to cause injuries. I think we know intuitively when we're moving if we can we feel that tension kind of build up in our muscles where we know okay, this is actually going to cause some discomfort versus building up that tissue and feeling it cause pain, right? Movement should not cause pain. So just focusing on if a certain exercise is causing you pain, don't do that specific exercise, find a different one or figure out why, that exercise is causing you pain. So, incorporating resistance training is important for exercise movement, like we said, and just making sure that you're training for longevity.
That's an excellent point too. It's actually another reason why it's a lever, especially the exercise component of movement, which is the focused component, where you can actually take time to pay attention to your body and learn, oh, my body doesn't like this movement. It doesn't like bending this way. And you can start to ask further questions of why is that the case? And do I want this to be the case long term? And should I do something about it? Which is there when you get into, looking into more um, specific ways of correcting posture and things like that. Obviously, we, always bring it back to functional patterns because that's, you know, in terms of diagnosing the body, that's
Which again,
where,
like we can dive further on, like,
yeah.
how to really correct your movement because with both of us being registered massage therapists, like this is our main focus when we talk to clients. Quality of movement, posture, how the tissue actually feels
Mm,
and looks and moves. So we can definitely deep dive in movement.
can't wait. Okay, last couple points I have for movement. Just I'm gonna ring them off, just because I don't want to get into too long on this. Metabolically important lever that movement does in terms of increasing insulin sensitivity. That's a big one when it comes to chronic disease, metabolic syndrome, particularly diabetes, right? Where we become insulin insensitive. It's becoming more and more known now that majority of our modern diseases are coming from some form of insulin insensitivity, which creates a cascade of hormone abnormalities and dysfunction in our body. That's also something that we can go into specifically. So that's a big one. And then cognitive function. So as far as I know, um, exercise is one of the only things that generally improves executive function, which is basically if you can think of it as your conscious thought, right? Um, that's all your, let's say, top down overriding. When I'm looking at the world and I'm making a choice and making a decision on what I should do, and juggling different variables and deciding which one's more important right now, all of that is considered executive function. And we used to think that things like Sudoku and crossword puzzles and things like that improved your working intelligence, but we found out that they don't really. They improve your ability to do those specific tasks. But exercise is one of the few things that like generalizes over everything in the body. Everything in the body gets better when you exercise. Your thought process, your memory, right? Obviously the physical components, your hormone function, like it's kind of the master regulator of how our body should function, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah, you can't skip out on the movement. So this is why it's, you know, these are these levers are not in a particular order, but movement is definitely one of the top ones.
yeah. And it's also I think important to point out when we talk about, let's say, nutrition contributing 80% of the weight of body composition in terms of how to change that. That's also why I wanted to point out that people focus too much on body composition, because then what people can think is, oh, nutrition's 80% of how I deal with my health. And it's not. It's the primary driver of body composition, but that's only one part. That doesn't mean your body is functioning well inside just because you're skinny, right? Muscle mass comes into play, quality of movement comes into play, um, sleep, which, our next topic is sleep. All these things are important in health. And so don't get confused with, because nutrition is a big impactor of body composition, that it's 80% of your well being and health, because that's not the case. Um, okay, sleep. Let's see if you have anything to add there.
No, I think we covered movement.
Okay, you talked to me a little bit about sleep.
Yeah, I think we all understand or we all understand that we need sleep.
Uh,
We all get tired at night. We all have to get some amount of hours of sleep to be able to function the next day. Um, this is the body's process of regenerating and rebuilding any kind of tissue in the body that's been broken down that needs to be repaired. Our mental state changes at night. Our hormones are also regulated by sleep. Um, Sleep is really important. And do you have anything to add to that?
yeah, I mean, the you probably know what I'm going to say about this because I always bring this up, but it's
Yeah.
like this is kind of the undeniable explanation for why sleep is important. If you think of us in an evolutionary sense, and back when we were in the wild, not living in houses, all cozy, every animal on the planet, maybe species actually, has some form of sleep like state. And you have to think of how crazy this is. Because if you think of the animal kingdom, survival of the fittest type, um, predation and not dying is pretty important in this equation. And if nature has selected for us as humans to take pretty much a third of our life and have us be unconscious, completely vulnerable to predation, there has to be a good reason for it. And that alone is like a pretty inarguable definition as to how important sleep is. Everybody knows it's important, but you have to think of how crazy it is that nature has said that this is so important that a third of the time we're alive, we can be completely unaware of our surroundings and utterly vulnerable to any form of predation. And so that's, I mean, if you weren't convinced on why sleep is important, hopefully that one helps. um yeah, I mean, you pretty much
Yeah, without going into detail about like what you can actually do to improve your sleep, because again, we can definitely a deep dive into that. Just changing your sleep habits and the sleep quality, I feel like can have such a profound impact on your health. And it's a completely cost-free way of changing your health, you know, without trying to buy certain foods or buy a gym membership or personal trainer, you know, to change those other two levers. Like sleep is the one thing you can do tonight and have a better
Right.
day tomorrow. So,
Yeah, it's that's huge. It's free. It's super easy.
mhm.
It doesn't take effort. It's not showing up to the gym. It's not like you just go lie down. And you pointed to something else, which is it's also one of the things that you will see immediate feedback about. Like if you get a good night's sleep tonight, you'll notice it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
And even for those people that do struggle to fall asleep, because I know a lot of people do, um, we can talk about different strategies on how to like calm your body and to be
yeah,
able to get into that deep sleep that you need. Um, so stay tuned for that.
cool. All right. This one's a little bit. Now we're going to talk about the mind and how we use mental tools to influence our health. Um, it's a little bit less direct than the other areas because I think the other, not I think, the other areas, nutrition, movement, and sleep. I think the reason why those are the big three is because they work in the physical realm. They have an action reaction um, mechanism, right? Um, to whereas mental tricks and mindset, and even our next point, like community connection, those they don't have a physical manifestation. They're a little bit more abstract. And so it's not as easy to understand the mechanism of how they work. A lot of it is implicit. And
And maybe not right away, right? The like taking
yeah,
working on your mind and working on your community connection, those things take time and it takes continuous effort to kind of notice changes. But I feel like with your nutrition, movement and sleep, you can pretty much notice like how you feel right away.
yeah, the feedback is a little bit harder to recognize. You know, if you
Yeah.
eat bad food, you're going to know in a couple hours that it doesn't, your gut doesn't feel good and you're probably running to the bathroom. But like, you have to be a little bit more in tune to know, like, if I speak this way to my wife, I kind of get this sense that, you know, she's upset at me and maybe I shouldn't have said that. It's like, it's a lot of more gray area. So,
Hmm.
um, what do you think? Like, how does, how do things that we do with the way we think affect our health? Like, what's the mechanisms? Um, yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Just the way we think about the world, like how we're going throughout our day to day, how we view our the situations that come up in our life or the events, like we either deem them good or bad. And you can do that either way. You can let an event or a situation change your whole day, or you can separate, you know, and move on from that. And your mindset and the way you carry yourself throughout the day, over time can change your life, really, your trajectory of your life, like how you're viewing each day. Even if you're going through a hard time, you know, how you view it can actually change, um it physiologically as well in your body. So
Right.
your mind and your body is are connected, obviously. Um, but just focusing on the way you're viewing things that are happening in your life, becoming self-aware.
Yeah. I mean, this topic is a little bit harder to pin down, right? Um, it's harder to draw on a set of facts and point to if you do this, then this will happen because it's not guaranteed. But most people are aware of, for example, the placebo effect. I don't think people take that seriously enough. And we don't apply it to our life. Like we think of the placebo effect as fake, but I don't actually care. What I care about is the outcome. And so if the placebo effect works reliably, it works. It's not fake. It's just an indirect mechanism of getting a certain output. And so, to your point about how we think of any given situation determines what the rest of our day and what the rest of our life looks like. Like how we perceive the world. Well, it literally determines what we see.
Mm-hmm.
Like our values, sorry, what we value going into a situation determines what we see through our perception. So, what we're perceiving about the world is based on what we're trying to do, right? We're creatures of action. So, if I'm really hungry and I look over at our kitchen, I'm going to be very happy because there's a lot of things in there that will help me solve the problem of hunger. But if I'm hungry and I walk into the bedroom, I'm going to be very upset because I'm going to see nothing in the room that's useful. It's going to be as if nothing was in the room because I'm looking for food. And so think of like how many objects we have in this room. You're not noticing most of them because right now we're focused on a podcast. So the only things that are being brought to your attention are, maybe the microphone and your water when your throat is dry, and, noise just went off on our computer. So that's important. But your whole life is just a series of that. So whatever you're putting your attention on, which is basically what you were alluding to, is the idea of attention, having intentional attention throughout your life on, if I'm focusing on my health and what's best for me, the world is going to start presenting itself in that way to me. And that's super important as a general concept in terms of how our mental state affects us and how we can regulate we can top down control our perception by having a good idea about where we're trying to go and why we're trying to go there. Um,
I think it's also important to note that anxiety and depression are states, normal states. We should have different times where we're feeling anxious, we're feeling maybe sad, or all kinds of different emotions. They're all different signals to our bodies, right? They're not, obviously you can have extremes, and that's where you need to get further help, but being aware that anxiety and depression is a part of human functioning, and it's a sign to look in further. Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling sad? Like, they are normal feelings, but they're a signal to kind of look into it further, right? And maybe it's looking at your diet. Maybe it's looking at, am I moving enough, right? So just knowing that these are things that we can use as measurements of our mental state.
right. Yeah, and I think you nailed the point about them being normal. And obviously, we talked about this, I think, in the last episode. Um, this idea about, maybe it was the first one, about pathologizing our emotions is like, I think this is one of the worst things we're doing right now in this world of teaching everybody that they're a victim. Is we're teaching people that every time they feel a negative emotion, something's wrong. And the way you're framing it is much more useful and I think correct, which is, it's just signals, it's information. It's our body's way of interpreting information and telling it to us in a way that will create action. And so you're right. If you're feeling sad, like okay, if you're, let's say you have a test coming up and you're anxious about it, you're not broken. You believe the test is important and it's not guaranteed that you will do well on it. You're supposed to be anxious about it. If you were feeling cold blooded, either, like, yes, there's the option you're really smart and the test is way below your threshold, in which case that just means that it's not a challenge, which means that you're not going to grow from it, or you don't care about it. And so that's a perfect example of the anxiety you have before a test is exactly what you should feel. If you're doing something that you care about, you want a good outcome for, and you haven't cheated, so you don't know all the answers. It's like that's what a test is. Now, does that mean that people cannot have a crippling level of anxiety? Sure. But you also want to ask yourself how much of the magnitude of my emotion is coming from me feeding back into it, right? Because what likely happens in most cases is you feel a little bit of an emotion and that panics you because basically we've got to this point where we think that if we feel an emotion, something's wrong. And so you go, oh my God, something's wrong. And especially when that emotion is anxiety, now it amplifies the anxiety because now you think something is wrong, more wrong than what is actually wrong, which is maybe nothing. And now you've got to this point where all of a sudden you sit down at your test and you can't hold your pencil because your hands are sweating so much and you can't focus. And now you say, oh my God, I have test anxiety. And that's the trick is we think like I have something. No, you're experiencing something. And to frame it that way is very important because you need to let your mind know this is one experience and there is an option to experience it a different way if, like you said, you actually take action to rectify that. And maybe, in this scenario, it's you go for a hard run or you do a hard workout before you have a test. Maybe that's something that would work, right? It's you kind of have to trial and error it. But yeah, that's like super important to understand the normalcy of emotions and understanding what they're trying to tell you.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers the mind.
More or less. I mean, that's definitely a topic that's unending and
Yeah, and we
I can
didn't
talk
go
about
into
forever.
detail of like what you can actually do to change your mental state and to work on your the feelings of anxiety, depression and those things, but we can definitely go into that
Yeah.
further.
I mean, yeah, we'll go into that a lot just naturally because you can't get around the problem that we have to use our minds. That's
Well, and it's something we've been really focusing on too, like correcting in our own life.
mm,
So we'll definitely share what has helped us.
awesome. Okay. Um, Community, connection, social relationships. This is all kind of lumped in together. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll say something that you always like to say is that the worst punishment in the world is solitary confinement.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah.
We didn't make this podcast for prisoners, but
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing you can do to someone is take them away from criminals and put them by themselves, right? Like that's again, it's just like the definite or the explanation as to why sleep is important. This is kind of the equivalent to that for social connection. Is like it's the drastic case of like if that's the worst punishment that we have, I mean, you can obviously make the argument that there's physical torture and things like that that are worse, but like pretty reliable one. And in our penile system, within the realms of what we consider to be um, morally acceptable, that's the worst one we have. Um, yeah, again, this is a harder topic to explain the mechanisms, right? Because we can come up with a bunch of different reasons how you make this better, but we're trying to focus today on why does making it better matter. Um, I would say this is probably the most implicit area that we can talk about in terms of it's kind of like explaining why you like music. Like to say why are why is your relationship with your best friend important is kind of a dumb question because you can come up with reasons, but none of that will actually encapsulate it because there's so much implicit understanding of why it's important that hard it's hard to explain concisely. But you can, like we've already done, you can kind of use it in contrast a little bit. So it's like, well, think of how you feel when you don't get to see your friends and you're by yourself all the time. Like we know that these things have a negative impact on us
mhm.
and that
Well, we saw it over, the period of time during COVID when
Yeah.
things were closed, right? You couldn't see family or friends as much or at all.
No.
And there was a lot of people feeling that loneliness.
Yeah. And you saw it in suicide rates, alcohol use, food addiction, right? These are all manifestations of a damaged soul, you know?
Yeah, and I think you can work on yourself and your health as much as you want through nutrition and sleep and movement and even have a great mental state. But if you're not able to build quality relationships and keep those relationships in your life, um, then there's a lack of meaning
Yeah.
in your
What's the
life,
point?
right?
Yeah.
We're all social beings.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think it's something that personally you and I know we're active in working on because we tend to be on the side of introvert in the sense that we regenerate by being alone, quiet, not a lot going on. But definitely we make pushes to be more social, say yes to social events when our knee jerk reaction is to say no. Um, and I can speak for myself. Literally, almost every time, it's great, and I'm glad I did it. There's very few times where I've said yes to a social gathering and then come home and been like, oh man, I wish I would have just stayed home. Like most of the time after the fact, it's you realize that it's good for you.
Well, I think just understanding, I think we all know if we're more introverted or more extroverted and how different people need different amounts of social interaction.
Mhm.
But fundamentally, even the most introverted person does need, some social interaction and have a relationship that is meaningful in their life. So making that a one of your focuses is very important. I think there was a study that was, looking at the length of people's lives and their quality of their relationships. And it was directly correlated with people that had more higher quality relationships, not necessarily more, just higher quality, meaningful relationships in their life. It affected their longevity, how long they lived. So it's definitely one of the main levers that you should focus on in your life for health.
Yeah, definitely the number of social interactions is not zero, no matter how introverted you are. Um, and to your point about like the studies and that, when they look at, for those of you who are familiar with blue zones, have you watched those like documentaries on the blue zones?
Yeah.
So there's controversy on cherry picking information and all that, but the one thing that's common across every time they try to look at these populations that have extended extended longevity on average is the social connection and their reason to live. It's like they're all super enthusiastic and community based areas. There's That's the one thing that's been associated with all of them, um, is that, and how like it literally might be the most important contributor to long quality of life. It's harder to measure, but like it might be the most important thing, overall, because like you said, what's the point of doing all these good things? I mean, just at a biological level, all of our processes are designed around reproduction, making more people, and then taking care of those people so that they grow up to make more people. Like,
And think back before civilization, no one could have lived on their own.
no, it was death.
Yeah, so you had to rely on having quality relationships that people you could trust and people you could work with,
Right.
right? So we've evolved that way to need people in our lives.
Yeah. And I mean, that's our whole serotonin system, right? Is what would you call that? Neurochemically
Yeah, we're
is
wired.
is wired around monitoring where we are in the social hierarchy so that we can maintain our spot and not get kicked out. Because like you said, if that happens when you're in a band of, 80 people nomadically traveling through a forest, you just die because That's it. We sacrificed all of our, as a species, we sacrificed our physical attributes, our ability to climb, be like pound for pound. If you consider our strengths with chimps, it's like not even comparable. Um, like we sacrificed all of these physical resources to survive, and we multiplied them by putting all of our eggs in one basket, and that basket was community, right? It's We multiplied everything by saying, instead of putting all the evolutionary energy, let's say, into making me as an individual resilient, we're going to put it all up into brain power, which allowed us to think and plan and socialize. And that's all part of this system that allows us to be, this crazy thing that humans have become. But all of that came from working together. And it's the foundation of everything we have. So our goal, what we wanted to accomplish with this is like, what can we add value? Because everybody's doing podcasts and all stuff. Is like, we're trying to make it accessible. You know, we don't need another Andrew Huberman. You know, we don't need another Naudi Aguilar in the movement field. Um, and we need people that can take this information, which Huberman does a pretty good job of making it accessible. But it's hard when you listen to 20 episodes of Huberman and now you have 45 different protocols that you're supposed to remember, how many minutes a day for what temperature and all this stuff. It's like having someone who can bring having an outlet where someone has brought to you the distilled version of it and can say, start with these, you know. And if you're a hyper specialist and you've already been, crushing health for 10, 15 years, a lot of these might not be the most useful, because we're not going to be telling you a whole lot of new stuff. Every once in a while, I would like to go into a deep dive to, well, frankly, just help us get deeper into these things and why they're important. But
But really, this is just for, how can the average person,
yeah,
busy person, really make uh, quality changes in their life? That's going to make a really big impact. And we're here to just simplify things.